Moving forward with Stirner's philosophy, I want to tackle the topic of egoism and how it relates to Max's writings on ethics. Stirnerian egoism is but a small portion of the vast ocean of egoist morality, so first I think we ought to take a small detour and discuss the three types of egoism. First, psychological egoism, the belief in self-interest as the only motivation individuals act upon, the rejection of the very idea of altruism. Number 2, rational egoism, a principle in which what is rational is that which is self-interested, that rational agents seek to actualize values. 3, ethical egoism, a principle stating that moral agents ought to act only in their own self-interest. Firstly, when talking of Stirner, we can cross ethical egoism off the board, as Stirner rejects normative claims as a moral anti-realist. That is to say, Stirner has little patience for ought claims, and probably thought of them as mere fixed ideas. For Stirner, the question isn't, is it wrong to act selflessly? But rather, is it possible to act selflessly? So that leaves us with psychological egoism and rational egoism, both of which were views that Stirner held simultaneously. What this leaves us is with a philosophy that says it is both rational to act in self-interest and essentially inevitable, impossible to act in any other way. I don't think most people will have all that much of a problem grasping rational egoism. It's a relatively simple way of saying rational behavior is geared towards fulfilling the ego. That being said, I still think we'll need some further clarifications. Number 1 being, Stirner was not advocating hedonism. In fact, he makes it very clear that the seemingly endless indulgence in material goods has the potential to empower an external object and disempower the ego. In this way, Stirnerian egoism not only rejects the control of others by their fixed ideas, but demands that individuals not be helplessly ruled by their own desires and egotistical appetites. We must become masters over ourselves. And number 2, Stirner also warns of reason and rationality becoming new, fixed ideas, strictly dictating human action, because the values that I seek to actualize may be different from the values that you seek to actualize. What is rational for I may not necessarily be rational for you. This makes Stirner's view of reason a very subjective one. Now, on to psychological egoism, the one that may give some trouble. I know it did for me. When faced with the idea that all acts are purely selfish acts, it may puzzle you or even confuse you. Typically, one will attempt to construct a scenario in which an action is clearly done altruistically. Let's say, for example, a soldier in war throws himself down upon an explosive, sacrificing himself for the good of his fellow soldiers. Clearly, this act was purely selfless, and there was no way one could construe this in a scenario in a selfish manner, right? Wrong, at least if you ask a psychological egoist. Someone like Max Stirner may have responded by saying, while the soldier had nothing to gain from sacrificing himself, perhaps he did so to avoid the shame and the guilt associated with not doing so. Or perhaps he threw himself atop the explosive to be a martyr, a hero that will be celebrated in the future. The point is, any action that may seem altruistic on the surface may very well have selfish motives that are the true forces at work. This brings us to two distinct kinds of egoists, the conscious and the unconscious egoist. The unconscious egoist is one who is unaware that his actions are dictated by selfish desires. They truly believe that their actions are fulfilling some higher cause elevated above themselves. While the conscious egoist is one who is aware that selfish individual desires aimed at fulfilling their ego is motivating all of their actions. For Stirner, everyone is an egoist, but only some recognize it. It's important to be very nuanced when looking at Stirner because in some sense he was quite nuanced himself. For example, earlier in the video we kind of brushed off ethical egoism. Some might challenge this by arguing that while Stirner never explicitly makes normative statements, that doesn't necessarily relegate him to a position of, say, moral nihilism. Others may argue that classifying Stirner as a psychological egoist may have also been mistaken, arguing in favor of the idea that Stirner was a predominant egoist, one who sees human action as primarily selfish with some exceptions, and they may very well be correct, and it's important to keep that in mind. If I personally had some criticism, they would be in that it appears Stirner has set up an unfalsifiable position, where no matter what example you can come up with, he can turn it around on you and suggest that the motivation is purely selfish. I would like to answer the question of altruism using the scientific method. Does the burden of proof fall upon those who are claiming altruism is real? What do you guys think? Do you agree with me and this interpretation of egoism? Do you agree with egoism itself? If not, why? Explain in the comments below. I'm always looking forward to hear what you guys have to say. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.